to the occasion of celebrating the wonderful life that my father had, and has still continued. Thanks everybody for coming. Just want to introduce myself. I'm Keith. I'm kid number 3 and the first boy, which I guess means I get nominated to be the MC. So I like to say I'm taking the role from my cousin who did this for me a few weeks ago, unfortunately. So I get to do it for my family tonight. First of all, just want to say thanks to everybody who's come to the service today. We appreciate all the cards and sympathy and emails and everything. It's just absolutely overwhelming, and just incredible love and care that's been put on by the Toronto Society, who have been a spiritual home to my mom and dad and taken good care of us, and all for them especially for all the many years. Thank you also to the chancel, Lee, of course, the usher, the organist, Annika, flowers done by Uncle Roger and Aunt Ann. Absolutely. And refreshments team headed by Glenda Cowley and her team of people behind the scenes helping out. And of course, a thank you to Michael for the really wonderful service that you did. You really captured the essence of Dad, so thank you, wherever you are. To start off, just for a few short speeches, I think Jim Cooper is going to speak first as the recent pastor and a good friend of both Dad and Mom.
It's good to be here, to see so many friends joining this celebration of a wonderful life. I think we all know that in the new church, which we've talked about a lot today, I'm sort of following the same theme that Michael had, that there's a strong emphasis for all of us, both on family and the thought of being useful to others. And there's a passage here from the work, The True Christian Religion, a brief passage I'm going to read. It says, all of the Lord's commandments have relation to love towards the neighbor. And in a word, they teach not to do evil to the neighbor, but to do good to him. That those who do this love God, and God loves them, is in accordance with the words of the Lord. So the idea of, we talk about how the law and the prophets, on these 2 commandments, hang all the law and the prophets. And that means that everything in the Word, everything, all the stories of the Old New Testament, hang on this idea of loving the neighbor because you love the Lord. And we're gathered here in the church that has been Richard's spiritual home for his entire life. And either even in this building or the one before. And when I became pastor here, it was Richard who showed me all the inner secrets of how to keep the boiler working. He attended New Church schools, and I was doing a little research myself. Did you know that he had a paper published in New Church Life?
No.
When he was in grade 7, apparently the class was supposed to put together, they were doing the 4 doctrines, and Richard got to do one of the doctrines, I think it was the doctrine of life, and it was published in New Church Life. So he's a published theologian. We also know he served on the board of directors of the Worldwide Church, and of course he worked for Olivet and his home church, both as a paid employee and as a volunteer. And I think later when people are talking about and sharing remembrances, as we all do, we're going to hear a lot about how much he loved and cared for his wife and family. And we're going to hear a lot about times when something broke and he showed up with his tools to fix it and to get people on their way again. You're going to hear about a man who has lived the life that the Lord asks all of us to live. To be aware of the needs of others and do whatever you can to help them. whatever tools you're given. So I have two memories that I want to share before I pass this on. The first was a few years ago when I was still pastor here. At the end of the New Church Day picnic, out there on the ground, the kids are playing games and the adults are gathered under the trees and in their groups having conversation. And Karen and I happened down into the hall, down here. And we had set up some chairs and tables in case it was going to rain. And Jillian and Richard realized that that was all still set up. And so Karen and I come down, and there were Richard and Jillian all alone, putting away the chairs and tables that had been set up in case of rain. It was something that needed to be done, so the two of them together just dug in and started doing it. I will say that Karen and I helped when we found it. 7, 8 years ago. The other memory that I cherish is something we all see almost every Sunday. Richard coming into church with his wife and the pew filling up with his children and grandchildren as they all worship the Lord together. I'm going to close with a passage from Matthew. Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Thank you.
And now we have my brother Phil, who's going to come up as a representative for the kids.
I was doing okay, Jim, until that last image, so thanks for starting me off. Good evening. On behalf of my siblings, their partners, and our mom, we are so grateful that you all came out to celebrate Dad's life. Thank you to Michael for doing such a fabulous job of telling all of us how practically perfect Dad was. But was he really that perfect? I'll let you answer that for yourself by the time I'm finished speaking. Look at some examples. Number 1, after he retired from office work, Dad went into business for himself as a handyman, and as many of you in this room know, he was darn good at it. And yet either he didn't need the money, or he didn't believe that customers would be able to pay more, so he didn't charge much per hour for his services, even though he definitely could have. So, was he all that perfect? If my memory serves me correctly, we were within a kilometer of home after a long camping trip, and suddenly the car died due to no gas. I won't tell you exactly how Dad solved this problem, but it had to do with siphoning gas into his mouth from another car. So he was resourceful, but hey, the car ran out of gas, so was he all that perfect?
But it was really, really, really windy that day.
At any given time over the years in Dad's office, you could spot piles of mail, old church brochures, and if you'd opened the drawer, you would have found a cardigan that had been destined for the garbage pile. This is a sampling of things he couldn't or wouldn't throw out. So, was he all that perfect? Dad was always involved with fixing projects, and these projects always took longer than expected. So I'm guessing you can imagine that he may have caused a bit of stress on his bride by not coming to dinner when he was called. So was he all that perfect? Now I'm not saying this next trait is necessarily bad, but it can be a problem if you're trying to have a somewhat serious conversation and you realize the person you are conversing with has just suddenly nodded off. Either in the middle of what you are saying, or better yet, in the middle of what he is saying. So was Dad all that perfect? One evening, Dad decided to work on the boat engine after dark. Something about a timing light. And next thing Mom sees is Dad standing there in the doorway with his finger hanging by a little bit of skin and suggested they should go to the hospital. Now, I don't want to question Dad's logic here, but I'm not sure it was the best idea to work on a running engine at nighttime. So, was he all that perfect? In my early teens, we got carpeting in the basement. And so all the doors had to have an inch removed so they would be able to open and close with ease. So Dad, of course, being a fixer, took to the task. It was amazing to see his face when he carried the newly cut door downstairs to the appropriate place and realized that he had cut the top off instead of the bottom. You already know the outcome to the story. He went back outside and glued the perfectly cut piece back on, and then cut the right end this time before placing the door in the proper place. So, was he all that perfect? And finally, as you may know, Dad was very meticulous about his wallet. Everything had its precise place, the bills were all lined up, etc. And yet for some reason, he had in his back pocket on the day he and I were working on removing an exposed rock which was underwater. So there we are, both in the water blasting this rock with a 25-pound gas-powered drill. I can still see Dad's face when at some point, while we were attempting to aim the drill in a precise location, he turned around and saw his wallet floating downstream. He moved quite quickly and spent the next hour or more drying out the entire contents of his wallet before placing all items back into their assigned locations. So he had a wallet in his pocket in the water while drilling. Not sure how perfect he really was. All right, so this is the hard part now. So, I invite you to think about your answer to my opening question. Was Dad really that perfect as described by Michael upstairs? As the above examples might have suggested, perhaps he was practically imperfect. But then combined with the practically perfect part you heard upstairs, Dad equals a pretty awesome human being.
Yeah.
So what is an awesome human being? One who is humble, acts with integrity, carries a gentle strength with him at all times, and is a friend to so many. One who had the foresight to purchase a family cottage, knowing its worth would grow not just with improvements, but in priceless memories. One who is careful with money, which allowed him and us to see so much of the world. One who didn't have an advanced degrees, but was driven instead by his thirst for knowledge. He learned from reading, from experimenting, and from trial and error. One who looks to the Lord and values nutritious education. One who devoted to connecting with his 12 grandchildren. And one who supports and deeply loves his children and their partners. And one who takes the marriage commitment very seriously and honors, respects, and deeply loves his wife for almost 58 years. I love you and miss you, Dad.
All right, and then I think we have Natalie O'Connor coming up as the eldest grandchild.
Here you go.
Alright, I'll do my best to get through this, but no guarantees.
Can you say who you are?
So I'm Natalie. I'm the oldest granddaughter of 12 and one soon to be. The grandkids are all in the back. Alright, so about a week ago, I called up to Canada to just check in on kind of how things were going, and was promptly asked by my grandmother to give a short speech about my grandfather in honor of all the grandchildren. My mom nicely chimed in and said that the speech only needed to be about a minute or so. Alright, I can handle that. My grandma nicely says, well, you've got actually up to about 5 minutes. Now, for someone who's not a fan of public speaking, 5 minutes is a long time to talk. However, in this case, 5 minutes could never come close to covering the amount of time that I would need to say all of the incredible things there are to say about our grandfather. For example, did you guys know that he spent hours trying to fix a tiny chain necklace that my sister Marie loved? It had broken in several places, and he spent hours with pliers, thread, and those magnifying glasses, if you guys know what I'm talking about, trying to fix her favorite treasure. Or, did you guys know that Grandpa taught Gray to repair the fairy lights up at the cottage so that we could always have beautiful lights up there whenever the various families came up? By the way, Gray, you did a great job. So to help me write this speech, I asked all of my cousins to help me by sharing some of their favorite memories of our amazing grandfather. And when reading over the answers, a couple of common themes popped up. The first, of course, being that he is the fix-it man. If something was broken, you brought it to him to be fixed. Benjamin nicely put it that Grandpa would help everybody out whenever he could. And honestly, I think that sums it up completely. Grandpa would go out of his way to help anyone and everyone without ever taking a second thought for himself. Another theme that came up was the conversations and the time that Grandpa would spend with each of us individually. He was so good at listening to us and discussing the topics that really sparked our interest. Skylar fondly remembers the conversations about cell phones, electronics, trains, and even 3D printers that they would have together. Connor loved that Grandpa would buy him car magazines and would sit and talk about Grandpa's first car ever, a 1950 Ford. While Benjamin loved that Grandpa would sit and read train books with him and build boats out of scraps of wood together. I think there's still some of those lying around at the cottage. A third theme that came up was that Grandpa secretly, or not so secretly, was a teacher, just like everybody else in the family. Did you know that Abby can say her alphabet backwards? Well, she can, and guess who taught her that? Some of the favorite memories that MW, Christine, Greg, Connor, and Abby all had were of sitting down at the dock or going out on the boat with Grandpa and him teaching them about astronomical charts and stargazing. Also getting eaten by mosquitoes at the same time, just saying. You could just see how passionate he was about the stars, and the knowledge he shared was always fascinating. A final theme came up when looking at the answers my cousins had shared about their favorite memories, and this was his sense of humor. Julie nicely put it that at first growing up, he could seem a bit gruff and scary. But once you got to know him, he was actually just joking around. I will never forget playing a game of characters/charades, those who know what that is. And he would get so angry if you couldn't guess what the action was. Two of these ones in particular. We'll see if you guys can guess what this is.
Yes.
By the way, that's an antelope for all of you idiots that didn't know. My other favorite one, which was quite traumatizing as a child. By the way, that was changing a diaper. And how were we so stupid that we could not understand that what these charades were? Alright. Now Elizabeth remembers a time in Hilton Head Island where he had borrowed her sunglasses because he had forgotten his, and she joked with him about needing to hide from the paparazzi. It's also on the board. I do have to say, he wore those sunglasses very well. But my favorite quote is still when Hayden remembers when Grandma had taken time to make a nice meal, and Grandpa simply says, "Nope, Brussels sprouts are not good for my Parkinson's," and refused to eat them. That's pretty nice. All in all, this does not even begin to describe all of the wonderful things our grandfather gave to each and every one of us. From all of our trips to the cottage and down to Hilton Head Island, Grandpa touched our lives in ways that we will never forget and will cherish forever. He took time to make each of us feel special and loved, and I know we all miss him dearly. Thank you.
And now we have John Starkey to speak with him, one of Dad's oldest friends, and I believe best man at Mom and Dad's wedding. And here he is.
Thank you, Keith. Good afternoon, everybody. It's lovely to see so many people here celebrating the life of a guy who was my friend for 75 years. And it's certainly a pretty hard act to follow with all the things that have been disclosed so far. But I do have some interesting and new information. I was given a good segue into what I had prepared by listening to the sermon in the church, and there was some minor reference to a bad boy or something like that, so I thought, thank goodness, at least they won't be surprised at what I'm about to say. But then Bill goes ahead and he takes all the fills that subject pretty completely. But I have a few other things as well to share, so that's okay. And it's just interesting because in the service upstairs I realized that Richard was the perfect combination of somebody who lived in this world and somebody who understood the other one. And I'd wrestled with that for years, about 75 years, wondering what held this guy together. But that's, when I listened to everything going on today, that's what held him together. The fact that he understood this world and he loved the other world as well. And that's what makes him so unique. So my official talk was going to cover 5 different areas: the early years on 133 Fern Avenue, high school and college, his wedding, which I was best man for, then a little bit about the families, and finally, goodbye. So the early years, I met Richard when he was 7, I was 8, almost 9. We had just come from the West, and we were sleeping over for one day while we got ready to go up to Camp Norval. 5 o'clock in the morning, Richard was up, turning on his electric train in the closet. Well, that went on for about 20 minutes until his mother heard him, and she came in, and she was not pleased at all with this effort. So that was my very first knowledge of Richard, that he really wasn't too interested in listening to what the common wisdom might be about things that he should or should not do. So, and also that he was very mechanically minded and liked things like that, because he just thought that train was something else. Then there's the Olivet Day School. I started in grade, Joel, help me, grade 4 or 5 when I went there, or 6. Yeah. Anyway, Richard she was my classmate down in Bernard. But Richard was a couple of years behind me, and one thing he always managed to do, and I don't know how he did it, because I was doing my work, I had thought he was doing his, but maybe he wasn't, because Miss Benita Rushman was the teacher. She'd go up to the board, "Okay, Richard, put a mark there. That means you have a detention, you're going to have to come in after school." Whereupon he would throw a piece of chalk across the room and receive a second tick mark on the board. Anyway, that was just some of the things that told me that Richard was his own person. And I guess his life has pretty clearly shown that. Moving on to high school. We've heard already today that his first car was a 54. Was that the convertible, I believe?
Yeah, 51.
I happened to buy that car from Richard, so I know it well. But the news is that that was not his first car. His first car was purchased in 1953. He was born in 1938, you do the math, and he bought a 40 Oldsmobile with a straight 8 engine. I don't know what he paid for it, but he owned that car, and he had to park it 3 blocks away from his house every night, so that no one would know that he owned this car. So this told me, oh, and it was a straight 8 engine, you know, and it was a powerful thing. I'd never seen a straight 8 engine before or since, but boy, did that car have power. And there were some difficulties with the mechanical control. I won't go into that now, but on one occasion he took me for a ride in High Park. I said, "Richard, stop the car. If you're going to drive that way, you let me out right here." And he smartened up. So, really, you know, and I didn't think of this until last night, thinking about this talk, but Richard was the little brother that I never had. And I've gone 75 years without realizing that. but that's what I realized today. And he needed a friend that was that close to try to keep him out of some of the things he might have done otherwise. I went to Bernathen in 1953-54 in that class. I came home the next year to Toronto. Richard went down, and then we shifted again. So I wasn't there when he was there, and perhaps that's enough said. Then he got serious. He met Jillian, and he figured he better get some education, and he was at Ryerson. And I was staying in the Parker household at that time with room and board, because I was at the University of Toronto finishing my degree, and he needed help with his calculus. I'll never forget those sessions, because they just were just like pulling teeth trying to get it. But he was determined he was going to do it, and he did, and I really thought he did a wonderful job for that. Then he came to the wedding, and he invited me to be his best man, which was wonderful. And of course there was a big party, and I needed to invite a date. I mean, you can't go to a party without a date, so I invited Donna to come with me. Well, I guess I really didn't think that through clearly about what kind of a commitment I had just made. But that's a long time ago now, and it's, I must thank Richard and Jillian for inviting me to be their best man. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. So I was proud of Richard, though, at that time, because he had made an excellent choice for what would bless his life in the future. Then there was a period when we were all working. I was up north for about 15 years, and we had occasional visits, but after we came back to Oakville, we did try and get together on Boxing Day, and family would come over, and the kids would get to know each other. And that continued in one form or another right up to the present time, and at Christmas just passed, Richard came. But he didn't look too good, and it was obvious something was very, very wrong, and we all know what happened next. So now for the goodbye part. Richard always loved his Lord Jesus Christ. There was no fear, only trust. Several days after his cancerous appendix was removed, and after he discovered that his normal functions were not healing properly, he told Jillian of his decision. Then he told me he had prayed to the Lord for guidance. He explained that carrying on was not possible, and that he would no longer accept food. It was timely, and that he was still of sound mind. Such a decision could not be put off. It needed to be firm. It was like he knew what would happen if he tried to continue. And I was honored to be able to tell Phil and Keith what I knew about the reason for their dad's decision. In my opinion, he knew that Jillian's happiness depended on that decision. At this time, therefore, it is appropriate to acknowledge and give thanks for Richard's leadership in guiding his family by setting an example of how life should be lived, by loving his God and his family in a way that was beautiful and kind. And since Jim has stolen my segue closing remark, I'll just simply say, well done, good and faithful servant.
We have one more person to speak in just a minute or so, but I just wanted to bring out a few things about family that I forgot to mention. The bagpiper today was my cousin Wayne, who's taken it on a real passion. And it was definitely requested by Dad to have Wayne sing for or perform for him. And the other thing I just want to note, I didn't know if anybody noticed the two candlesticks that were up at the front of the chancel. And they were the candlesticks that were made by my grandfather, known to most of the people in this room here as Papa Doo. And they were used in my parents' wedding, and they were also used at many other family weddings since then. So I just want to point that out as well. And with that, I'd like to invite my Aunt Ursa to come up as sister-in-law.
Our family knows well Richard's fixing capabilities. I had to add that because he came to our house many times. Most of us can look back and remember kind acts from people that made a big difference in our lives. Richard was one of those people. He gave Carl, our oldest, a brand new CCM tricycle that lasted for all 7 of our children. Shortly after our daughter Holly was born, my dad died very suddenly, and John was taking our old car with passengers to the funeral in Bernathen. As he prepared to leave, stuffing rags in the holy parts of the car so that the passengers would be comfortable, Richard drove into the driveway and said, "John, you take my car." This was a big gift because that car was nearly new. Another time, which was crucial, was when Wayne had meningitis while we were at my parents' cottage in Pennsylvania. After a week in hospital, the doctor said the only way Wayne could travel home was lying down in the back seat of a car. Since John had already taken an extra week off work, we needed to get home, and our car was full. Dear Richard drove all the way down so that Wayne could ride lying down in the back seat. It was a big gift. Another time was when we were packed and ready to go on holiday, and a pipe burst in our crawl space, which caused great angst as the kids were afraid that we wouldn't get to go. Richard said, "Don't worry about it, I will take care of it." And he did. He did so many things with our family over the years. I first met him when he was 13, and that was 68 years ago. The boys went camping with his Uncle Richard and their dad, and he was always such a good spirit. And I might add, very handy when you have car trouble. I bet most of you don't know about picking up a gas tank that fell off your car, which fell off our car. Richard says, "No problem, just put it in the trunk." John thought that was a bit scary, but Richard says, "No problem, we'll find a hose and attach it and work it to the..." Well, the story goes on because on the way home with the gas tank in the trunk, which made the trip rather uncomfortable, they were in a restaurant, and John thought he better call me and let me know what was happening. So he calls. Carl and Wayne are sitting at a table, and he says in a big loud voice, "Urs, the gas tank fell off and Richard put it in the trunk." Carl and Wayne just sort of slumped. We don't know him. Anyway, all that is to say that Richard was a very integral part of our family, and he was a kind and gentle soul, and we will miss him very much.